Welcome back to Based MMA. In this video, we're going to be talking about UFC fighters that must win their next fight. And what I mean by this is not, fighters that are necessarily going to be cut from the UFC if they lose their next fight, but, UFC fighters that their reputation is on the line if they lose their next fight. And I'm going to start off with Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo, he's seen as this MMA genius, this MMA analyst, this MMA expert, before he fought Aljamain Sterling, before he fought Merab. Everybody saw him as this genius, this great mind of MMA game, great, fight IQ, and now, Henry Cejudo decided to come out of retirement to fight Aljamain Sterling, which in theory, Aljamain Sterling is kind of a good matchup for Henry Cejudo. Loses a split decision to Aljamain Sterling and then comes back and gets absolutely embarrassed and mocked by Merab. And now Henry Cejudo still thinks he's an MMA genius. And to be totally honest with you, if he loses his next fight, I think his reputation, his legacy has already been destroyed and tarnished. People used to consider Henry Cejudo as top 3 in the sport, one of the GOATs of MMA, one of the GOATs of UFC. And to be totally honest with you, after these back-to-back losses, I feel like nobody really gives a fuck about Henry Cejudo. I feel like his wins are actually aging a lot worse. That Dominic Cruz win, which was kind of a last... it was a short notice fight for Dominic Cruz. Wasn't that impressive. Even that rematch against Demetrius Johnson was kind of competitive. You could have even given that decision to Demetrius Johnson. So when you look at Henry Cejudo's resume, it starts to age like shit, and it doesn't help that he's coming off 2 back-to-back losses. If he loses his next fight, Henry Cejudo is basically done, man. I think he's already basically done. But if he loses his next fight, whoever that may be, whether that be Dominic Cruz, a rematch against Dominic Cruz, or I don't know who's he going to fight, maybe a Song Yudong, a Peter Yan. Man, Henry Cejudo, his reputation is basically over. Like, he's basically lost all his reputation. And, I'm kind of glad that this happened because we all kind of saw Henry Cejudo as like this great mind of MMA. And to be totally honest with you, the more I watch his breakdowns, the more I've noticed that he's really biased and he has a worse prediction rate than Based MMA. It's crazy how many main events Henry Cejudo actually gets wrong in his videos and his breakdowns. And to be totally honest with you, Henry Cejudo should have probably stayed retired because at least, his legacy would have stayed intact and people would have still seen him as one of the greatest fighters, one of the greatest competitors in MMA. While now, he's coming off a loss to Aljamain Sterling, which was a split decision, but then he completely got mogged by Merab and basically shut down. So Henry Cejudo must win his next fight. Now the next fighter is Choros do Bronx Oliveira. Choros do Bronx Oliveira, he fumbled it against Armin Tsarukyan and he made the same old mistakes he's been making his whole career. It's not that Armin Tsarukyan showed anything special. I already knew he had elite grappling. I knew he had elite control. I knew that he had nasty ground and pound. But that's not really what surprised me from that Charles Oliveira versus Armin Tsarukyan fight. What surprised me was how timid and shy Charles Oliveira was on the feet. Like, where was this confidence at? Like, where was Charles Oliveira's confidence? And to me, Charles Oliveira, it just proved to me that this guy is not really hungry anymore. One thing that I said before that Charles and Armin fight was that I was a little bit worried about Charles Oliveira because, in the fight week, he was crying. He was talking about how happy he is in his life and that he's already won and stuff like that, which is awesome. Like, I'm happy that Charles Oliveira is happy in his life, but that's not the mindset that you need when you're going into a fight with a very hungry contender who has everything to gain and wants to fight for the title. Like, that's not the mindset that I want to see Charles Oliveira go into a fight. You know what I'm saying? So I felt like Charles Oliveira was very timid on the feet. And to be totally honest with you, after Charles Oliveira lost to Armin Tsarukyan, he did lose a bit of his aura, and I've started to see more people say, you know what, Mateusz Gamrot has a chance of beating this guy. And to be totally honest with you, if Charles Oliveira loses to Mateusz Gamrot, his aura is gone, man. His aura is gone. He's been exposed. So Charles Oliveira must win his next fight. I don't understand why he was so timid against Arman Tsarukyan on the feet. I don't know if he was afraid of the takedowns. I don't know if, he wasn't too confident on his takedown defense. We saw in that first round where, when he went for that guillotine, it was a guillotine. He was on top position over Arman Tsarukyan. Arman Tsarukyan was very quickly able to reverse the position. So maybe he just felt that Arman Tsarukyan was just a bit too strong for him. But like I said, I just feel like Charles Oliveira isn't that hungry anymore. And I feel like if he loses his next fight, it's basically over for Charles do Bronx. And like I said, I don't think he'll ever fight for the title if he doesn't be like a Mateusz Gamrot. I still think he could get 1 or 2 more wins and think he could potentially get a title shot. But to be totally honest with you guys, it wasn't necessarily that Arman Tsarukyan did anything incredible against him. It was more that Charles Oliveira just didn't show up. I don't know why he was so timid on the feet. I think he landed only 19 significant strikes over 3 rounds, which is pretty crazy. He wasn't really able to hurt Arman Tsarukyan on the feet, which I told you guys, Charles Oliveira is either going to win or lose this fight on the feet. And he didn't win the fight on the feet. If anything, Arman Tsarukyan was landing more. He was landing more volume. He was actually landing his jab, landed an axe kick on Charles Oliveira. I think Charles Oliveira only landed a right hand. That was a really strong right hand, but it wasn't really able to rock Arman Tsarukyan or really make Arman Tsarukyan respect the power of Charles Oliveira. So Charles Oliveira, he always likes, after fights, he's like, an injured lion is still a lion. The lion is hungry. Bro, shut the fuck up with the corny lion stuff and actually get to fucking work, and you must win your next fucking fight. Now, moving on to the next fighter who must win their next fight. Actually, kind of ironic because he just got a fight announced. Jamal Hill. Salty man Hill got chin and won against Poatan. Talked so much shit about, how Poatan is not on his level and his stock is in the absolute dumpster fire right now. Nobody gives a fuck about Jamal Hill. He's a meme of the week. I see so many edits of Jamal Hill getting absolutely knocked out. And I know he just got a fight announced against Khalil Roundtree, so it just shows you that Jamal Hill is a very emotional fighter, a guy that, cares a lot about what other people think, and now he's rushing into a fight against Khalil Roundtree, who, I'm going to be totally honest with you, that's a very winnable fight for Jamal Hill. But still, man, it's not a good look to you. Just got knocked out by Poatan. You got slept for the first time in your career, and now you're rushing in 8 weeks later, a little bit less than 8 weeks, to fight Khalil Roundtree at UFC 303. I don't know how that's going to turn out for Jamal Hill, but I also think Jamal Hill is one of those fighters who must win their next fight, because when you talk so much shit, you're going to get clowned on. And if you lose 2 in a row, especially to a guy like Khalil Roundtree, I think Jamal Hill is basically done in main events or pay-per-views. Like I said, the fighters that I'm talking about in this video aren't necessarily fighters that are going to be cut from the UFC, but they're fighters that their reputation is on the line. And I think Jamal Hill is one of those fighters who must get an impressive win over Khalil Roundtree at UFC 303, or he's basically fucked. He's basically fucked. And I like Jamal Hill. I like that he's a salty guy. I like that, he's very brash and he says a lot of crazy shit, and he's kind of funny. He's very salty. He's always fighting with people on Twitter. I love that shit. I'm glad that Jamal Hill is making this shit entertaining. But make no mistake, he needs to prove it in the octagon once again. And Jamal Hill's resume now looks like complete shit, like a win over Johnny Walker. Okay, Johnny Walker's always getting chin. Jimmy Crute, Thiago Santos washed. Okay, yeah, he beat a Glover Teixeira. That was a pretty good win in my opinion. It was a very impressive win. But still, Jamal Hill must win his next fight against Khalil Roundtree, because right now he's an absolute meme and he must win his next fight. Now, the last fighter who must win their next fight, and to be totally honest with you, I think this fighter needs to win his next fight more than any of these other guys that I just mentioned, and that is Colby Covington, who had put one of the worst title performances in UFC history. Colby Covington is 0-3 in title shot, and in my opinion lost all of his fans after UFC 296. And when fighters lose, I get it. There's going to be the bandwagon fans that kind of jump off that fighter. I completely understand that. But the main reason why Colby Covington lost so many fans in that fight against Leon Edwards wasn't necessarily because he lost. It was because of how he fought. He fought like an absolute bitch. He was a pussy that whole fight. He was scared to engage. He was so scared of Leon Edwards. Like, how are you going to talk about a guy's father? Which I get it. Look, he's selling the fight. Do I think it's something that you should go for when you're talking shit? No, absolutely not. He definitely crossed the line. But if you're going to go there, at least show up. And one thing about Colby Covington is that he always used to show up to his fights. Like, even when he lost to Kamaru Usman, you know, you're like, okay, he lost to Kamaru Usman, but he put a banger of a fight. You know, he put it all on the line. But this Colby Covington against Leon Edwards looked absolutely washed. He looked scared out of his mind. He didn't even decide to grapple until the 4th and 5th round. And then he took down Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards was able to get back to his feet and then took him down, which is just embarrassing. Leon Edwards pretty much beat him on his own game. And the fact that Colby Covington couldn't even take the loss like a man. Like, I've never seen Colby Covington take a loss like this. Like, bro, you just got exposed. You put a terrible performance, dropped the shtick because you look like an absolute loser. He even made Donald Trump leave the stadium at his post-fight speech because it was just fucking embarrassing. Like, this man thought he represented America, but he's just an absolute joke. And Colby Covington most likely is going to fight Ian Gary. I think it's going to be the co-main event of Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. And Colby Covington must win his next fight. I believe that if Colby Covington is able to beat Ian Gary, all of his sins are going to be forgotten. Nobody's going to care that he lost to Leon Edwards in an embarrassing way, or his shtick, or the fact that he crossed the line, because Ian Gary is the perfect opponent for Colby Covington right now in his career to gain back momentum. Because if you're able to beat an Ian Gary, who people hate, who people call him a cuck, who make fun of his wife and the whole situation that I'm not going to get into, if you're able to beat that guy, who's also undefeated, right? You know, pretty good fighter. Ian Gary's a pretty decent striker. If you're able to beat that guy, Colby Covington's fan base is going to grow by the minute. Everyone's going to jump back on Colby Covington. And I wouldn't even be surprised if Colby Covington gets a title shot after beating Ian Gary. As embarrassing as that is, don't be surprised, man. I really do believe that Colby Covington has the most to lose, because if he loses to Ian Gary by getting knocked out or finished or just absolutely outclassed like he did against Leon Edwards, Colby Covington is basically finished. He should basically just retire. He probably should have already retired because he's basically a part-time fighter. I mean, after that Jorge Masvidal fight, he didn't really fight for more than like a year and a half. So Colby Covington must win his next fight. So all these 4 fighters must win their next fights because their reputation is on the line. You know, these were fighters that, you know, talk a big game, but, you know, they lose. You know, they don't admit their mistakes. I mean, I think Charles Oliveira is actually pretty humble loser. I mean, Henry Cejudo takes losses pretty well, but Jamal Hill and Colby Covington, they talk so much shit. And they got absolutely exposed. So these are fighters that must win their next fight. And if you guys don't remember, I made a video last year of UFC fighters who must win their next fight. And that video, I had Dustin Poirier, Peter Yan, and Robert Whittaker. And they all won their next fight. So I'm bringing that back for this part 2. So these fighters are going to win their next fight. I promise you that. So make sure to like and subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next one.